Greetings, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm just delayed by the experience of the green screen woes. I'm very unsatisfied with the green screening in the new OBS, but that is not something that we want to let distract us. But hopefully I'll have this solved before the next live stream. So I apologize for the weirdness of this image. All right. So this past weekend, I gave a presentation to the Bhaktivedanta Institute of Higher Studies about Bhagavatam's astronomy. And I'm going to share that presentation with you now and then go over the Q&A from it. Any other introductory words? No. Let's do it. Let's do it. So it's going to look really bad now. But as you can see, the title of the presentation is that the Bhagavatam's astronomy is normal. And this is a very strange, abnormal thing to say, because most people think of this astronomy as being very weird. Now, when I talk about Bhagavatam's astronomy, I'm talking about Puranic astronomy, because the Bhagavatam represents the Purana in general. And when I talk about Puranic astronomy, I'm talking about ancient Indian astronomy, because that is what the Purana expresses. So very few people think that ancient Indian astronomy is normal. Most people think it has to do with turtles standing on elephants stacked up 7 high or something, upon which there is a serpent holding a big plate that's supposed to be the earth. Some version of that, or the universe is something like concentric donuts separated by different kind of sugary syrups with a big golden birthday candle in the middle. None of this stuff sounds like normal astronomy. So if I come along and I say, hey guys, it's normal, that's a very abnormal thing to say. But that is what you have come to expect from Vic DiCara, abnormality. So the first question is, if it's so normal, then how come everyone thinks it's weird? And there are 2 categories of reasons why someone would not think that Bhagavatam astronomy, Indian astronomy, is normal. First of all, they can't figure it out. That might be one reason. They can't figure it out. They don't have the brains to figure it out. That's what I mean by the can't. Or 2 is they don't want to figure it out. So let's look at each category in more detail. Why would somebody not want Puranic Bhagavatam astronomy to be normal? Well, the first reason is maybe they want to make it look bad. Maybe they have an agenda. For example, like British Orientalism. That was the agenda, and that's the Western world, that's our first access to the Indian world is through the British Orientalism. So a lot of that is in the water without us really knowing what we're drinking. Or it might not only be British Orientalism, but it might be the way that modern people tend to feel about pre-modern people. It tends to be condescending. So a person that's very invested in modern society and the progress of modern things and so forth, progress of modern science, the importance of it, may not want to see that ancient people were saying the same stuff that we're saying now. So we might have a bias. And it's very important to identify these biases, because these are very real things, because we see what we wish to see. And it's I mean, you can see what you don't want to see, but it's much more difficult. Somebody has to really put your face right in it. But it's very easy for us to see the things that we're looking for. So we should talk about what we might be looking for that might prevent us from seeing that ancient Indian Puranic Bhagavatam astronomy is actually the same basic stuff that modern astronomy is saying. So this is the first thing, a bias against it. The second thing is the Zen koan effect, the contemporary spiritualism effect, the hippie effect, which is the idea that if something is normal, then it's normal, it's material, it's ordinary. And if something is very confusing, then it's very, very spiritual. So people that have that kind of attitude towards spirituality, that it must be very confusing, those people probably don't want to be disappointed by finding out that the Bhagavatam's astronomy is normal. It would be disappointing because normal things are boring. But things that make your head go, that's spiritual stuff. So that might be a lot of us, especially in the astrology world, might be a lot of people that think that somebody with a crystal ball is way more exciting than somebody with a ruler. The third issue is investment anxiety. Now, also this question could also be asked of the tropical Vedic zodiac. How come people don't want to see it if it's right there explained in the texts? And you'll find these same things, especially 3 and 4, operating in that question. Investment anxiety means when we put a lot of effort or time into figuring something out a certain way, we don't really want to have to give up on that and see it a different way. So for example, if you've been spending months or years looking at a sidereal horoscope and making sense out of it, that all the effort you put in, you don't want somebody to suddenly come along and say, hey, it's supposed to be tropical. Look at this, it's totally different. Because then you have to throw away all that investment. So same thing, if you're spending 30, 40 years figuring out why there's 7 elephants standing on each other's back at the bottom of the universe, you don't want somebody to come along and say, no, you're totally off in left field. That's not even what it means. You don't want somebody to do that because you've invested so much time and energy in exploring that. So such people will also not want to really see the normalcy of Puranic Bhagavatam astronomy. The fourth thing is really a big deal. It's loyalty. This is a big deal, especially in Asian and Eastern circles, because we are loyal to people that took care of us. So we're loyal to a teacher. So if you have a teacher that comes along and says, the sky is green, and then you spend a whole lot of time figuring out why the sky is green, and you really are seeing that it's actually blue, but you will kind of look away from the blueness of it because of loyalty to the teacher. Similarly, if you have an astrology guru or you look up to your heroes and they say the zodiac is sidereal, then you're not going to really want to take an opposing view. Similarly, if your guru taught Bhagavatam astrology as a bunch of donuts floating in space or as a bunch of elephants standing on each other's backs, you might not want to hear somebody say that's totally wrong. It's actually very normal. So these are 4 really real issues that are equally as real as the actual knowledge and information itself. It's equally important to understand what would block us from receiving knowledge. And these are the 4 things. Then there's also the issue that maybe they just can't. Maybe they can't see it, even if they want to. And actually, that's kind of not a very big issue. Because should you want to see that the Bhagavatam's astronomy is normal, it is not that hard to see it. There's just a few prerequisites that are not very daunting. You just need basic competency in Sanskrit. The reason for this is if you don't have basic competency in Sanskrit, then you're entirely dependent upon the translation, which means you're entirely dependent on the translator. So you relate Sanskrit. You simply, let me see, the connection is still okay. You simply need to be able to have Sanskrit vocabulary, really. Just to know several important Sanskrit words and be able to use those words so that you're not entirely dependent upon English. Similarly, you need about the same amount of competency in geometry if you want to understand Bhagavatam's astronomy, Puranic astronomy. When I say you need basic geometry skills, I mean if you know what pi is and you know how pi is used for figuring out how circles are, the dimensions of circles and things like that, that's what you need. Basically, that's all you need. I mean, if you can add, subtract, multiply, divide, and understand how to use pi, then you kind of know all the math that you need to know. To be able to see that this astronomy is talking about real things that we can actually see with our telescopes and we can actually see with our eyes. The third thing is you do need to know astronomy a little bit to be able to understand what they're talking about. Because if you have no idea of the subject that somebody's talking about, it's much more confusing. So you should be familiar with contemporary astronomy, and you don't really need to be terribly familiar with the most bleeding, cutting edge metaphysical astrophysics. You know, just basic stuff like how many planets are there, what order are they in, how are they situated in relation to the sun, what is the movement of the sun, what is the movement of the earth, etc. Just like basic stuff. And classical astronomy also, because the Puranic astronomy involves the type of astronomy that we use in astrology. So it's mixed together in the Puranas. The astronomical and astrological astronomy, it's one thing because their astronomy is from an observational point of view. So in other words, it's from what we see here on Earth, and that's the kind of astronomy that we use in astrology. So you need some kind of background in what the zodiac is, and you need some kind of basic background in astronomy. Then you'll be able to understand this. Just Sanskrit, a little bit Sanskrit, like you can use words, a little bit of geometry, like you know what pi means, and a little bit of astronomy, like you know that there's planets, for example, not donuts. And then you're good to go, except for one more thing. You also need something called poetics. That's weird. Why would you need poetics to understand astronomy? Well, this is a little bit weird. This is the one way that the Bhagavatam and Puranic astronomy is a little bit weird. It's not normal entirely. It's a little bit weird in this one point that usually or normally astronomy is not taught in an artistic context. It's not taught in a poetry is not used to explain astronomy usually. Emotions are not involved in teaching astronomy usually. But in Bhagavatam and in the Puranas in Bhagavatam and in Puranas, astronomy is always taught in an emotional context. Because the purpose of the astronomy is to get us to appreciate the world and feel an emotional response to the world. It's not just so that you learn facts and figures. What planet is where, how big is it, how fast does it move? Then you'll pass it, you memorize that stuff, you pass a test, you get an A, yay. Bhagavatam's astronomy is not just for passing a test or getting a job somewhere. Bhagavatam's astronomy is to feel connected to the universe, to feel amazed and in love with the universe. So its delivery is done with artistry and poetry, and it's meant to be emotional. So we need to be able to figure out the actual facts in this emotional setting. You'll need to use poetry, because that's what the speaker, the teacher who is a yogi, by the way, the teacher is usually not a yogi, the teacher is usually an astronomer. But in this case, the teacher is a yogi and teaching it in an artistic, poetic, emotional way. So to be equipped to that, we need to know poetics. And what poetics means simply is how words have multiple meanings and how metaphor works. It's not necessary that you have to know Sanskrit poetics. You just have to know poetics, how words mean more than one thing at one time. Okay? So those are the prerequisites, the qualifications for knowing that the Bhagavatam's astronomy is the same astronomy that we see today with our telescopes. First of all, you just have to be open to the idea. You have to not want to not see it that way. And there's 4 reasons why you might not want to see it that way. And second of all, you need a little bit of competency. And if you don't have those 3 or 4 types of competency, you shouldn't really expect to see it. But you should try to get those levels of competency. They're not hard to get. A little bit of geometry, a little bit of Sanskrit, a little bit of astronomy, and just sensitivity to the fact that it's being delivered through poetry, not through formulas. Okay? Okay, so let's see what's next. How normal is it? Well, it's 100% normal. The astronomy is 100% normal, particularly when we look at how it applies to the ecliptic. How the Puranas and how the Bhagavatam and how ancient Indian astronomy describes the ecliptic. And the ecliptic should be very, very relevant to you folks, because the ecliptic is the zodiac and the nakshatras. It's the place where the planets move, and it's what we use 99.99999% of the time for astrology. So how normal is the Bhagavatam's ecliptic description? It's 100% normal, which means it's based on the solstices and equinoxes, which means it's a tropical ecliptic, which is totally normal, by the way. That's the way that everybody does it. And that's the way it's done today, etc. It's divided into 12 zones, totally normal. These 12 zones are grouped into the quadruplicities, which is cardinal, fixed, and dual. And it's the same grouping that everybody knows. Aries and Cancer and Libra and Capricorn are cardinal. The Bhagavatam is saying the same thing. And those 12 zones are grouped into triplicities, fire, earth, air, and water, and it's the same triplicities. Aries, Leo, Sagittarius are fire, Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn are earth, etc., etc., etc. So the Bhagavatam's ecliptic is exactly the same ecliptic that we know and use today. So it's 100% normal there. Now, what about less astrological things and more like astronomical things? How normal is it there? I would say that the Bhagavatam's astronomy is more than normal, but certainly not abnormal. So more than normal means that it includes what's normal, but it also goes a bit beyond what's normal. There's a difference between being abnormal and beyond normal. If you're abnormal, then you break normalcy. You're not normal. If you're beyond normal, you are normal, but also more. It's quite a difference. Like if I say 2 plus 2 equals 3, that's abnormal. But if I say 2 times 2 is 4, that's more than normal. Because it includes the normalcy of 2 plus 2 equals 4, and it goes beyond it. It introduces another principle. So what are the aspects of the astronomy that is presented in the Bhagavatam and in general in the Puranas? First of all, that the earth is a globe. News flash. It's explicitly stated as a globe, repeatedly. But you might not want to see that. Why not? Let's go back to those 4 reasons. You may have heard people defaming it as a flat earth society. So you might just, that would be your bias when you come to read it, when you come to meet it. You'll be thinking, if you hear so-and-so is a jerk, so-and-so is a jerk, and then you go meet that person, you tend to see how much of a jerk they are. Or if you hear so-and-so is great, and you go meet that person, you tend to kind of agree that they're great. Similarly, if you hear flat earth, and then you pick up the Bhagavatam, you kind of see it as a flat earth thing. Or you may just think that if it's a globe, that's boring. Or you may think, hey, I thought it was a flat earth, and I invested all this time in now researching all this flat earth garbage, so I'm not going to give up on that. Or you may think, oh, my teacher said it was a flat. So these are the kind of things that will prevent you from actually reading a direct statement where, like, Bu Golam. Bu is a sphere. Kuvalaya, it's a sphere. He just says it to you, right to your face, but you won't hear it. That's why those 4 things are actually more important than you think. So actually, the Bhagavatam astronomy is presenting a spherical Earth, which is extremely normal. And this spherical Earth has a metallic core, a semi-solid interior, and a relatively thin crust, which is amazingly normal, geologically normal. How is it so normal? The most amazing thing about the Bhagavatam, the most abnormal thing about the Bhagavatam is how normal it is. How does ancient astronomy get all this stuff right? Those things have the right dimensions too. That's what I'm going to mention too. That's what's even more mind-blowing. The sphere with this metallic core and so forth has latitudes and longitudes that define it as a sphere and are equivalent to our modern equator, tropical, Arctic, and polar latitudes. This globe with these latitudes and this metallic core orbits the sun. And it's the orbiting of the sun and the spinning on it, and spins as it orbits. It's the spinning and orbiting of the sun which makes the sun appear to move. So by appearances, the Earth is stationary. But by actual mechanics, the Earth is moving and the sun is the center. That's very, very normal. It's gloriously normal. Like I said in this presentation, if you tell an artist or a person they're normal, it's a bit of an insult. But if you tell a scientific idea that it's normal, that's a great compliment. Because that means it is true. Everybody can see it's true. Everybody agrees. Everybody sees it this way. And the most amazing part of all this normalcy is that it's not just a globe, but the Bhagavatam describes a globe of the same size that we measure. It's not just saying it has a metallic core, but the core is the same size as the metallic core that we estimate. The semi-solid interior also. It's not just saying that there's a tropical latitude and an Arctic latitude. It's actually at the right degrees that we see it as today. That's the amazing stuff. So one of the barriers to entry for seeing this is just to have access to Sanskrit. And as I mentioned, that you don't have to have tremendous access to Sanskrit. You just need to know basic vocabularies. So I'll give you a list of the most important vocabularies. Ayama and ayata. These are the most important 2 things. Because if you don't, ayama means the length of an arc. So for example, if you draw back a bow, how far is it? So if you have a circle and you cut out a slice of pizza, how big is the crust? That's the ayama, the arc length. And then the ovoidal area, or the ayata, is the pizza. How much pizza is in the slice is ayata. And ayama is how much crust is along the edge. So it's very important to know these terms. Otherwise, you won't be able to assemble the proofs, the mathematical or the geometric proofs. You won't be able to assemble them if you don't know what the dimensions are measuring. And these terms are telling you the measurements. The Vitata means the circumference of something. Utseda means the height of it. The Dairghya means the length of it. The Vishala is like area. Unaha is just a general term, meaning something that has a size. So it's usually combined with other prefixes like Samunaha, the area, Parinaha, the circumference. And Vistara, for example, the ecliptic is Vistara from the latitudes. Vistara means a reduplication or an amplification or extension. The 12 ecliptics are just like multiples from, or just rays pointed out from the 12 latitude longitude points. That's called Vistara. So these things are very important. And then in a presentation like this, you can't do all the proofs, but this is what's in this book. So this book is published and everybody can get it. It actually makes sense. You can get it on my website, victikara.com. That has all the details. All the details. So I'll just show you some of the proofs now from the book. And then we'll go over to the questions and answers. So for example, this is what the Bhagavatam's astronomy is really talking about. It's really describing the Earth like this. You could see the equatorial latitude, the tropical, the Arctic latitudes going north and south, the poles at the north and the south. All the names of those things are describing the weather, and then the size of those things is getting smaller in 2 dimensions as it goes up, but keeping the same arc length. That's how it's described in the text. This is the proof of how you get such a thing. The arc length was said to be 9 kilojana. A yojana is a unit of measurement, which turns out to be 12.9 kilometers. You get a circumference of the Earth is 108 kiloyojanas, which is very, very compelling number, isn't it? So if you're actually interested in this, then please get this book. It actually makes sense. And then you'll be able to really dive into this to see this. This is the kind of stuff that's presented there. This is the proof for the tropical latitude. He approximates latitudes at 30, 60, 90 degrees. That's how you get the ecliptic as well. Everything is a slice of 30. But the actual tropical latitude is 23 degrees. He includes that measurement by specifying that the ecliptic has a radius of 11.1 kiloyojanas. So if you do this math with that, then you see 23 degree tropical latitude, and that also makes the Arctic latitude correct. Again, the details are in the book. Remember I said about core, mantle, and crust? Here's what it actually looks like. Also, this 9 kilojana size of things is maintained. Ilavrita now has a 9 kilojana size, basically. And Meru also has a 9 kilojana radius, doesn't it? So see, all these sizes are the correct sizes by modern geometry. The motions I talked about, he says the sun Eva seems to move, but actually the Kanchanagiri's Parichakshita, actually it's the core of the earth that's rotating. And that rotation makes the sun appear to rotate, and it rotates through the cardinal directions in a particular order: east, southeast, south, southwest, which means that the boo is rotating. For that to happen, the earth had to be rotating counterclockwise from the top, looking down, which is what we say, which is what we see, which is what we measure today. And also the revolutional direction is counterclockwise too, because over the course of the year, the sun passes through the directions east, north, west, south, through the solstices and equinoxes. And so that would also be matched with this. And the book has a hint of a way to do a three-dimensional modeling of this to see how just accurate this is. I encourage you to read the book if this is your cup of tea. We'll talk about those, what is normal. That's going to be in the questions and answers. This is the last thing from the presentation. Remember I said the most interesting thing is that they're all accurate. All these sizes and dimensions are accurate. So here are the deductions of how you measure these things and convert all the measurements to modern units, kilometers, and what the units are. The Earth is supposed to be 12,770 kilometers in diameter, according to Bhagavatam. That's almost exactly what it is, according to modern measurements. The size of the sun is supposed to be 1,379,190 kilometers, according to Bhagavatam, and that's almost exactly what it is. And the distance between the sun and the Earth is supposed to be 150 million and some odd kilometers, according to Bhagavatam. And again, that's almost exactly what it is. So that's astounding. Furthermore, one more thing is that I mentioned that the Bhagavatam's dimensions, the Bhagavatam's astronomy is normal, more than normal. So here it has a kind of a resonance with the more esoteric aspects of, how do you say, cosmophysics, astrophysics, the more esoteric aspects of astrophysics. It describes a lot of mass. The Bhagavatam actually describes a lot of mass. Curiously, it describes about 97% more mass than we see. Which, if anybody is into the modern idea of dark matter, that's the reason why they're coming up with this idea of dark matter, is that there's about 95% less mass observed. So that's also, the Bhagavatam is also matching that. And what the Bhagavatam is saying is that this mass, which is actually there, is not perceptible to human beings. And that is not from the 16th chapter, actually, that's from the 17th chapter in the Bhagavatam. But just that key and figuring out how much mass is missing by the clue that Shuka gives, which is that it's equivalent to the size of Bharata compared to the size of Bu, then you could figure out how to reduce the sizes of things, and then you get exactly the correct dimensions of things using a very acceptable size for the yojana. All right. So that is this presentation. Now I want to move to the questions and answers. This would be new stuff. Okay, so after I gave this presentation, and by the way, this group, Bhaktivedanta Institute of Higher Studies, to whom I gave this presentation, has to be applauded for welcoming a presentation like that. Can you imagine if BAVA or AVA or whatever those Vedic astrology associations are invited me to give a presentation on the tropical zodiac? That would be a very laudable quality of them, that it would show that they're interested in knowledge, not just in politics. So that's kind of essentially what these people, the Bhaktivedanta Institute, did. They really invited this kind of radical views. This is radically different than what they're exploring. They're exploring flat Earth and donuts in space and stuff like that. So they really should be applauded for that. And it would be nice if other people could follow suit. This is really the way intellectual topics are to be discussed. Without partiality, without partisanship. So there was a question and answer after the short question and after the brief presentation. It was slightly heated. So I went and I wrote out my answers really fully because they were good questions, but you can't really answer them in 2.3 minutes, you know? So now I want to share with you the questions and answers. And then also I'll see if you guys have any questions and answers. So let's see here. I'll put this on the screen. You might not be able to read it, but maybe you can zoom in. I recently presented to the Bhaktivedanta Institute of Higher Studies the idea that Bhagavatam's astronomy is not at all outlandish. On the contrary, it is amazingly consistent with what is held to be normal astronomy today. There was a short Q&A at the end of the presentation, which I will cover in more clarity and detail here. So the first question was, what's normal? Somebody had the same question in the chat. Who decides what's normal? People decide what's normal. Specifically, people who are qualified to be authorities on a particular issue. Not every issue requires authority. So in some issues, it's just about preference. What's a normal preference? And for those things, there's no qualification. Everybody, the whole society decides what's normal. So for example, what's normal fashion? There's no qualification really. What's normal, likable, mainstream? What do people prefer? What's the music that's currently popular? What's normal music? What's currently the thing that people are eating, etc.? What kind of words are people using? So that's just that's a norm which is decided by the people who use these things. Other topics are not just about your preferences. They have to do with knowledge of things. So those topics require expertise. So for example, what is a legal norm means like, how is this law understood? That requires somebody with legal qualifications and legal education to determine. And the group of those people together decide on what's a legal norm. So lawyers, legislators, etc. If something religious, then it's the group of the priests and so forth, and ultimately it's the shastras or the scriptures. If it's something astronomical, an astronomical norm is determined by the opinions of qualified astronomers. And their consensus defines what is and what is not astronomically normal or accepted as a valid idea. That's what normal is. Now, the next question is, doesn't that change all the time? Doesn't normal change all the time? And the answer is yes, it can change. Especially things that are based on preferences. Those norms change a lot. Like, so, for example, what's considered normal fashion, that changes dramatically over the years. What's considered normal music, very dramatically. What kind of words do we use? How do we talk? What's normal in speech, that changes all the time. Because these things are not really decided by anything other than preference, and preferences change. It seems to me that the tendency for a norm to change depends mostly upon the intensity of agreement. Normalcy is decided by agreement. When people agree upon something, that thing becomes what we call a norm. And the intensity of the agreement upon a thing determines the drid tattva, the stubbornness of the normalcy, the resistance that it will have to change. The stronger the agreement that something is normal, which might mean the more people agree about it, and also the more strongly they are convinced in their agreement about it, then the less likely it is for that norm to change. Now, we can violate norms. And to violate a norm that changes often or has recently changed is not a big deal. It's easy to do. People do it easily. Even timid people violate a norm that just recently got violated. But to violate something which is very strongly agreed upon as a norm, as has been established for a very long time, it's not easy to do that. And Therefore, you find it happening much less often. And even less often than that, you find it happening successfully. People can try to defy norms, but they usually get squashed by the weight of normalcy. But occasionally you'll find someone can defy a very deeply established norm. For example, in the Western world, the transition from geocentric models to heliocentric models, or from flat Earth to round Earth. It was a norm that was very deeply entrenched. It took a while, it took a lot of effort, and then it switches over to a new norm. Even within a given field, there's a spectrum to how normal is a normal idea. In astronomy, for example, some norms are barely agreed upon. For example, the extraterrestrial origin of water. Other norms, however, have practically unanimous acceptance. So the Earth is a sphere. It's practically unanimously agreed by any expert. Or that space is basically empty and that there's planets every once in a while in it, and the planets are zooming around something that's bigger than them. There's gravity holding. That's like a norm, which is held very deeply, very clearly by a lot of people. So when I say Bhagavatam is normal, that's really what I'm talking about. Those norms that are very, very deeply held, those ideas which are considered to be very, very accurate, everybody agrees that it's this way. The Bhagavatam is in conformity with those norms. Now, somebody brought up that, hey, there's exoteric and there's esoteric astronomy, and my presentation seems to be ignoring that the Bhagavatam is dealing with esoteric astronomy. But actually, the Bhagavatam is dealing with both. So my reply here is, yes, there is exoteric and esoteric astronomy, but both of them should be normal. Normalcy in exoteric astronomy. Exoteric means external to you, like the measurement of planets and the Earth and so forth, the observation of physics. Exoteric normalcy should be defined by qualified exoteric astronomers, and normalcy in esoteric means interior. Esoteric concepts is standardized by qualified esoterists. I said this in my presentation when I said that Bhagavatam's astronomy is, quote, more than normal. Bhagavatam astronomy has both esoteric and exoteric components. It's mostly exoteric at this point in chapter 16. And I contend that both are astonishingly normal. I spoke at length about the exoteric normalcy. The esoteric aspects of Bhagavatam astronomy also promise to have normalcy with esoteric astrophysics, concepts like dark matter, for example, and certainly have extreme normalcy in the circle of esoteric Muni, Rishi, and Yogi. All right, now it shifts gear a little bit. This comes to the really big question, which is also the same question that people ask if you say that Vedic astronomy has actually really, should be using a tropical zodiac. It says right here, it should be using a tropical zodiac. Look, see? So the way that they will reply is the same as the way somebody will reply when you say Bhagavatam's astronomy is normal. Why are you saying it's all about donuts? They'll say, look, basically they'll say, who are you? Who are you to defy this norm? Is basically what they're going to say. The norm is that this is weird, or the norm is that we do it this way. So who are you to say that that's wrong? Throughout history, very qualified persons did not explain Bhagavatam astronomy in a way that modern astronomers consider normal. Why are you defying these persons? As you are noting, and as I said myself in my presentation, my claim that Bhagavatam's astronomy is normal is a most abnormal statement. When one makes an abnormal statement such as this, one has to demonstrate that their abnormal idea should be accepted, thus altering the standard concept of normal. As I said, it's not easy to go against a norm And that's very deeply entrenched, and it's even less easy to do it successfully. You really have to make a lot of effort, and the burden is on you to prove that this new thing is better than the old way. I believe I have done so. I believe I've demonstrated that my abnormal idea about the normalcy of the Bhagavatam Purana should be accepted. Please carefully, so just look and you check it out yourself. It's in here. It's all these pages. If you're not interested in it, then refrain from giving your opinion. At least have the dignity to realize that if you're not ready to investigate it, then don't give an opinion. And if you are ready to investigate it, here it is. Investigate it. Please carefully and impartially investigate my translation, explanation, and mathematical verification. That's the most important part. There's 12 proofs, mathematical geometric proofs, that this explanation of what's stated in the Bhagavatam is correct. Please evaluate those. And then reach an intelligent conclusion regarding the extent to which I have or have not succeeded to demonstrate that my unusual idea should become a norm, and how we think of ancient Indian astronomy. Now, the next question is, yes, but you're defying the teachers. Doesn't that already mean that you're a bad boy? Isn't this defiance that you have a demerit in and of itself? So these guys at the conference really had no idea why I felt this way, but I kind of had a small emotional breakdown, because this is the same stuff that I was exposed to in the Vedic astronomy circle, Vedic astrology circle, when saying, hey, look, guys, the Surya Siddhanta, the Bhagavad Purana, everything, it's in agreement with the whole rest of the world that the zodiac is based on solstices and equinoxes. It's a tropical zodiac. This is exactly what they say throughout history, all of our tradition. But who are you? Well, here's the idea. Who cares who I am? Who I am is my problem. Who I think I am is my problem. You shouldn't worry about who I think I am. You should think about what I'm saying. And here's the idea. Deal with the idea. Here's the idea. So similarly, in this situation, here's the idea. Evaluate the idea. No, we don't want to evaluate the idea because you're a bad boy. So this is a practical example of what I said was the fourth reason people might not want to agree that Bhagavatam's astronomy is normal. Loyalty. You are defying the people that we're loyal to, so you're bad. People should be forgiven or even praised. This is really interesting what I'm going to say here. People should be forgiven or even praised for blindly siding with authorities on issues they have no personal qualification to evaluate. Think about that. If I have no personal qualification to evaluate something, yet I go ahead and evaluate it, I should be criticized for that. But if I have no personal qualification and I just side blindly with authorities who have that, I should be at least forgiven for that blind siding. Actually, I should be praised for realizing that I don't have the qualification to figure out whether this idea is correct or incorrect. But so I'm going to rely on someone who does have qualification to do it. People should be forgiven or even praised for blindly siding with authorities on issues they have no personal qualification to evaluate. But on the other hand, people who are educated and experienced in their fields must be criticized if they revert to following an authority blindly. This is the dichotomy. The whole modern ideal of question authority is such a double-edged sword. Because if you don't have qualification to question authority, all you are is a brat and a punk if you question authority. So if you don't have qualification on something, you have no business questioning an authority. Shut up. But if you are qualified, then you have no business following an authority. You have business questioning. That is your business. And you should be criticized. Your demerit is if you don't question your authority. So on the other hand, people who are educated and experienced in their fields must be criticized if they revert to following an authority blindly. You might follow your authority loyally, but not blindly. They should never assess an idea by where it comes from or who it is endorsed by. Regular people should. 9 out of 10 doctors recommend smoking this cigarette. All right. But if you have some medical knowledge, then it's your job to assess that statement and punish the person who gave the misleading statement. They should never assess an idea by where it comes from or who it is endorsed by, nor by how the idea might positively or negatively impact their status, career, or happiness. That's an investment anxiety issue. Nor how much they like or dislike the various qualities of the person presenting the idea. Maybe you like me. Maybe you don't like me. Maybe you find me abrasive. Maybe you find me soothing. That makes no difference. Unless you're a layperson unqualified to do anything else. But if you're actually an intelligent person, it doesn't matter if you like my hair, my face, my teeth, my voice, my choice of words. Just get to the idea. Deal with the idea. It doesn't matter if you like my personality, my way of speaking. If I insulted or didn't insult, it makes no difference. They must assess the worth of a new idea exclusively by the actual merit of the idea itself. Now, the follow-up question is, if your explanation is good, why did these very qualified persons not present it already? Again, same thing. Same thing in the tropical Vedic astrology problem. It can't be right. I don't have to assess your idea because it's not the idea. This previous person didn't assess it that way. The previous person assessed it in a different way. And if your idea was right, they would have known it and they would have said it. So you should be praised for thinking that way if you have no qualification to enter the discussion. You should be congratulated for thinking that way. That's your job, to think that way. But if you have qualification to enter this discussion, you should be slapped for saying something like that. You should be corrected and punished for saying something like that. So how come previous acharyas, let's say, did not present the Bhagavatam astronomy in a way that sounds normal to a modern person? I will give you 2 reasons. The 2 reasons are this. Acharyas who have explained this section in the past have 2 particular qualifications that we have not overlooked. 1, they were exquisite bhaktas. Means they were into bhakti, and that was their exquisite qualification, was their bhakti, or devotion, love, emotion. And 2, they were speaking to audiences from many centuries prior. So these 2 things create 2 situations. 1 is because they're bhaktas, they'll have a different motive than an astronomer. And 2, because they have different audiences, they have different norms. A bhakta's primary objective in explaining the Bhagavatam is to serve Sri Shuka, the speaker of the Bhagavatam. Their objective is to achieve Shuka's objective. What is Shuka's objective in teaching astronomy? He said it is to arouse Shraddha for Krishna Prema. He said it's to give people a sense, an emotional sense of connection to the world. He explained that he would therefore not be primarily concerned with exact details of a topic that is infinite and therefore impossible to truly give exact details about. This is one of the really interesting things of how he opens up his section on astronomy. He says, this topic, you cannot exhaustively describe it. You cannot get it right. You cannot exactly get it right. But you can get the basics right. And so I'm just going to talk about the basics. He was primarily concerned with the spiritual emotional effect of contemplating the astronomical world. That was what Parikshit asked him. Please teach me about astronomy because I want to know the being that this whole universe emanates from. And by knowing the emanation, I can know the source. So Bhaktas explaining this section of Bhagavatam adopt the same attitude that Shuka had. Their prime concern is that their audience will appreciate the beauty and genius and kindness of Bhagavan, evident in the brilliant and generous structure of the world. Therefore, they're less concerned with exactness in their explanation of Shuka's geometry and astronomical mechanics, and much more concerned with clarifying the beauty of the poetry itself. If you want to see how other kinds of acharyas explain Puranic astronomy, like not bhakti astronomers, not necessarily the people that comment directly on the Bhagavatam, then there are books for that. You have Bhatta Bhaskar and Aryabhatta, and you have books like Surya Siddhanta, and those books are not talking about elephants standing on the back of elephants or donuts floating in space separated by syrup. They're talking about the solstices, the equinoxes, the rotation of the earth, the revolution of the earth around the sun. They're talking about the same exact stuff that we talk about in modern science. They are seeing it as a very normal thing. So that's the first reason why great authorities from the past haven't presented a Bhagavatam that matches modern astronomy, because one, that's not their intention. The astronomy is the secondary part for them. And two, they weren't modern. They have a different audience. Of course, a Bhakta commenting on this section of Bhagavatam would have to address its geometry and mechanics to some extent. But in doing so, their main concern would be that the details do not interfere with their primary objective. They describe and explain these details in a way that makes clear sense to their audience. A commentator in the 14th century, for example, would not have an audience distracted by the question, hey, why does this sound like the earth is flat? We know it's round. That would not be the question on somebody's mind in the 14th century. Quite the opposite, their confusion would have been, why is Shuka saying that the earth is a globe? It's flat. So they would have to be, to not get their audience distracted from the primary objective, they would actually be stressing the flatness in the descriptions. In summary, bhakti commentaries from previous centuries, or those that rely entirely upon them, explain things in a way that is not a distraction for the audiences of previous centuries. But what is really amazing is that Shuka's astronomy amends itself very readily without any alteration to be transparent and, quote, normal to a 21st century audience as well. That's the really amazing thing. Then finally, there's a final question, which I'll divide into two parts, which was about my claim that you need poetics. So this particular group is not too fond of seeing that Shastras are poetic. They're more like on the literalist version of things. So this is a natural question that they would have. The question is, when should we resort to poetry and metaphor instead of direct meaning? When you're reading a Shastra, when you're reading a text like a Bhagavatam, when are you allowed or supposed to go into the poetic metaphor of the thing, and when are you just supposed to take it at face value for what it is? That's the question. So my reply here is the word instead in this question is problematic because it suggests that metaphor is not reality. The question suggests that we have the option to access meaning without metaphor. However, we do not. Consciousness always accesses reality through metaphor, never directly. There's a little footnote on this, but let me just explain to you what I just said, because what I just said is really important. There is no question of when should we directly accept a truth and when should we use poetics and metaphors to understand it. There's no question that you have no option. It's always metaphor. Consciousness never directly accesses reality. We only access metaphor. So the footnote on here is it's slightly exaggerated to say always and never. Actually, the Indian psychology, the ancient Indian psychology agrees. It's a normal idea in ancient Indian psychology is that there's two moments involved in perception. That the first moment is instantaneous and the second moment is enduring. But they're two distinct states. The first moment is nirvikalpa gyan and the second moment is vikalpa gyan. So in perception, the first moment is just an undistinct reception of the data from the world. And the second moment is the interpretation or the metaphorization of the data into something that's understandable and interactable. So the word instead in this question is problematic because it suggests that metaphor is not reality. The question suggests that we have the option to access direct meaning without metaphor. However, we do not. Consciousness always accesses reality through metaphor and never directly. Language relies on metaphor. In fact, words themselves are metaphor. Therefore, metaphor is not unreal. This is the thing. People will think, wait, if it's a metaphor, then it's not real? It is real. The metaphor is real. Metaphor is a pramana, which means it's a way of providing factual information. Good poets reject baseless or unreal metaphor because those would not deliver accurate information about the subject. Good poets exclusively utilize metaphor with extensive factual correlation to the subject. When the subject is simple, metaphor required to convey it is very basic and transparent. But when the subject is quite complex or not well known to the listener, the metaphors become more complex and noticeable. Emotional states are almost always very complex, and therefore relatively elaborate metaphors almost always used to convey or excite them. You may have noticed that. We seldom talk about metaphor with any emotions with anything but a metaphor. Bhagavatam is getting a phone call, can you imagine? Bhagavatam is entirely metaphor, sometimes very elaborate metaphor, because it is both a spiritual and emotional text. In short, another spiritual means people don't know it, and emotional means it's very complex. In short, Bhagavatam's direct meaning is always metaphor. You have no option not to use metaphor. It's just how much metaphor. Bhagavatam's direct meaning, not again. Bhagavatam's direct meaning is expressed through poetry, through metaphor. Therefore, we always use poetic linguistic mechanics to analyze any and all parts of the text. So now here, the last part. This is the last thing about metaphor. So if Meru is not really a mountain, and it's just a metaphor for the core of the earth, then how can the gods climb it? Because elsewhere we talk about the gods climbing Meru, or Mandara is actually the northern solstice. It's a metaphor for the northern solstice. So if it's a metaphor for the northern solstice, how can the gods grab it and move it and use it to churn the ocean? Might sound like a silly question, but it's an important question to somebody that's trying to understand Shastras. Is this whole thing just a bunch of gas? Or is there any reality to it, or what? How are we supposed to understand those parts? So my reply here is, as I said, metaphor is not unreal. This is my favorite part. Metaphor is not unreal. Metaphor is a form of reality that is conveyable and interactable. What is a metaphor? It's a thing that we can understand. Metaphor is amarsha paramarsha, as stated in Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra. It's the ability to understand X by understanding Y, because X and Y have a relationship to each other. So its metaphor is real, and its connection to the other thing is also real. It's the form of reality that you can digest. That's what a metaphor is. That makes sense to you. Metaphor is a form of reality that is conveyable and interactable. Whenever we interact with reality, we interact with its metaphor. For example, let us consider the data on the optic nerve to be something close to reality itself, even though it's not. It's also a metaphor for reality. But just for the sake of our analogy, let's consider that the electronic blips coming down the optic nerve to the brain are the reality. We make a metaphor of this data by interpreting it with our intellect, and thus we see that someone has thrown a frisbee, that it's moving towards us. And the actual reality is just a lot of bips and beeps. But the metaphor of the reality is that there's an object moving towards us. It's a frisbee, and so threw it. Now, the most amazing thing is that you can catch the frisbee. There's not really, we can say there's not really a frisbee. There's really just this data on your optic nerve, or this data moving through space. But that data represents itself metaphorically as a frisbee, and therefore, and the metaphor is the part that you interact with. Therefore, you can catch the metaphor. You can touch the metaphor and thereby change the reality that's underlying it, the lower metaphors that are producing it. So what's still more amazing is that we can catch the frisbee. We can interact with the metaphor, and doing so alters the lower or previous metaphors that generated it. What the gods or other superhumans do in myths is not fundamentally different from this. They just have access to superior levels of metaphor because they have superior sensory data and superior interpretive engines. Just like we have sensory data coming on the optic nerve and an interpretive engine for it, so do the gods. But their optic nerve and their interpretive things are better. So their metaphor levels are higher. They're better levels of metaphor. They're more complete. Meta. Meta means amalgamated. So they're more meta force. Metaphors. We can change the momentum of mass by catching a frisbee. So we can change reality by interacting with a metaphor. They can do the same thing. But they have metaphors of our metaphors. We could change momentum and mass by catching a frisbee. They can achieve what might seem like to us to be interplanetary travel, for example, by climbing Mount Meru. If you climb Mount Meru, you can get to the moon or you can get to the sun. But what does it look like on our realm? It looks like interplanetary travel. But their version of the perception of interplanetary distances has a different metaphor. They have access to a higher metaphor. What they do by climbing Meru or churning Mandara is not fundamentally different from what you or I do by catching a frisbee or eating an apple. The only difference is in the scope of the impact. So that's what I wanted to cover today. So just to review, is metaphor not real? The metaphor is real. And the gods interact with a certain level of metaphor. Humans interact with another level of metaphor. That's where all the dark matter is. All the dark matter is in a different metaphor. How come other people didn't see it this way? As Bhagavatam's, how come they didn't see these metaphors and the relevance to modern astronomy? A, because they were in the 14th century, they didn't care, or 10th century or something. And B, because they were Bhaktas, they didn't care. Their objective wasn't, just like Shuka, their objective wasn't really to measure the Earth. Different from, say, Carl Sagan or a geologist whose objective is to measure the Earth. The people who are behind the Puranas and so forth, their objective wasn't to measure the Earth. They just wanted to measure the Earth so that we could appreciate the world. So their objective was appreciating the world and the source of the world, Bhagavan. So that's the primary objective is different. Secondly, what's normal? Normal is what experts decide is accurate. Does it change? Yes. Is it perfect? No. The Bhagavatam's astronomy matches what we see with our modern astronomy. Is either one of them perfect? No. He said so. Shukadev said so himself in his opening statement. But the really, truly amazing thing about the Bhagavatam's astronomy is that it does match 21st century astronomy. And if you want to really, really dive into exactly how and why and so forth, here's the book. It makes sense, Astronomy of Srimad Bhagavatam. It actually makes sense, Astronomy of Srimad Bhagavatam. You can get it at victorkara.com. I believe we will wrap it up there. Alfonso had a question. Would that imply that no such thing as direct knowing exists? Exactly. Okay, so look, this is an interesting question. So what Alfonso is asking is, if consciousness access, the question from the conference was, when should we use metaphor? When should we use direct meaning? My reply is there's no direct meaning. It's all metaphor. Everything is metaphor. Consciousness doesn't access direct meaning. It accesses metaphor. Alfonso says, if that's true, does it mean that there's no way to directly access reality? So then I had a footnote that said that there's two moments in perception. One is indeterminate and the other is determinate. Nirvikalpa and Vikalpa. So there is direct access of reality by everyone all the time. However, that is not the perception that we interact with. The perception that we interact with is the metaphorization of it or the conceptualization of it. So that's why it's described as an instantaneous moment. The nirvikalpa perception, which is constantly happening, is constantly instantaneous. Less than a measurable amount of time. However, when it is applied to the absolute, then time doesn't become relevant. So there is a way to have permanent nirvikalpa gyan, permanent direct access of reality, which is what people seek when they seek to understand Brahman. So the understanding of Brahman, the experience of Brahman, is nirvikalpa samadhi or nirvikalpa jnana, which is not instantaneous. It's where the instant becomes the eternity. So that might sound very attractive, but there's actually no metaphor in it. So it's not really at its full potential of beauty. Also, in regards to Alfonso's question, the concept of direct touch with reality also doesn't always just mean metaphor or not metaphor. The perception of reality is going to be through an interpretive engine, but it may be through an interpretive engine which is suited to extrinsic things or through an interpretive engine suited to intrinsic things. The interpretive engine suited to intrinsic things is the engine through which we perceive Bhagavan and the variegated nature of absolute reality. The interpretive engine which is suited to extrinsic things is the way that we perceive the false perception of separated and separable existences. So that's also when people are talking about the goal of immediate and unmediated experience. they're not talking about not having metaphor. They're talking about having a metaphorical engine which is intrinsic to the object of experience. Ruchira said, I had to miss the beginning. Was this Q&A live at the conference or presented to you ahead of time? How did they respond to your replies? This is, so after I gave the presentation that I gave at the beginning of this live stream, then they had some questions and answers, but the whole presentation had to be shoved into 20 minutes. So it wasn't easy. And the question and answers were like truncated to like 2 minutes or something, 3 minutes. So I couldn't really respond to them fully. So I wrote the whole thing out and then I did this presentation on them. Alrighty. Thank you very much.